Sometimes the greatest mistake a woman can make is choosing pride over truth. England, 1811. The spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Hartley House, casting golden patterns across the Aubusson carpet where Lady Cecilia Hartley stood motionless before the gilt-edged mirror in her bedchamber. 3 days remained until she became Lady Edmund Fairchild, Baroness of Thornwood, and the weight of that knowledge sat heavy upon her shoulders. "Your hair looks lovely this morning, my lady," Margaret Dawson remarked softly, her fingers deftly arranging the final pins in Cecilia's golden blonde hair. At 45, Meg had served as Cecilia's companion and confidant for the better part of a decade, and she possessed the rare ability to read her mistress's moods with unsettling accuracy. Cecilia met her own reflection in the looking-glass. Green eyes stared back at her, clear and bright, despite the restless nights that had plagued her since accepting Edmund's proposal. At 24, she had long since abandoned the romantic notions of her youth, those foolish dreams of marrying for love rather than duty. Yet some treacherous part of her heart still remembered a time when she had believed such things possible. "Thank you, Meg," she replied, smoothing the pale blue muslin of her morning dress. "Though I fear no amount of careful arrangement can disguise what I truly feel." Meg's reflection met hers in the mirror, compassion evident in her weathered features. "And what is it you feel, my dear?" Cecilia hesitated, then spoke the truth that had haunted her for weeks. "That I am making a terrible mistake." Before Meg could respond, a knock sounded at the door. A young maid entered, curtsying quickly. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but your father requests your presence in his study." The Earl of Hartley's study had once been a place of warmth and intellectual discourse, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes collected across decades of careful curation. Now it felt hollow somehow, as though the financial ruin that had befallen the family had stripped away more than merely their fortune. Her father stood at the window overlooking the small garden, his shoulders bent beneath burdens Cecilia understood too well. At 55, Richard Hartley retained the distinguished bearing of his station, but the silver in his dark hair had increased dramatically in recent months, and new lines etched his face. "You wished to see me, father," Cecilia said gently, closing the door behind her. He turned, and the raw anguish in his expression made her chest tighten. "Cecilia, my dear child, come, sit with me." They settled into the worn leather chairs before the cold fireplace. Her father took her hands in his, and she felt the slight tremor that had developed since his investments in the colonial ventures had collapsed so catastrophically. "I want you to know," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "that if there were any other way, any possibility of recovering our fortune without this marriage, I would seize it without hesitation. I know, father, Edmund Fairchild is not the man I would have chosen for you," he continued. "There is something in his manner that troubles me, a coldness beneath the courtesy. But he has offered to settle our debts completely, to save us from absolute ruin, and He stopped, swallowing hard. "I am ashamed that my failures have brought you to this." Cecilia squeezed his hands gently. "Your investments were sound, father. No one could have predicted the collapse of the shipping consortium. You are not to blame for circumstances beyond your control. Perhaps not," he said quietly, "but I am to blame for accepting Edmund's offer, for allowing my daughter to sacrifice her happiness to preserve our family's standing. When your mother was alive, she made me promise that I would never force you into a loveless marriage. I fear I am breaking that vow." The mention of her late mother, dead these 7 years past, brought a familiar ache to Cecilia's heart. "You are not forcing me, father. I make this choice freely, knowing what it means for our family. But what of your own heart, Cecilia? What of your own happiness?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither could fully voice. Cecilia rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where spring roses had begun to bloom. 2 years ago," she said softly, "I believed happiness meant grand romantic gestures and passionate declarations of love. I rejected a perfectly respectable offer because the gentleman in question did not speak of affection, only of duty and compatibility." Her father was silent, but she felt his attention sharpen. He knew, of course. Everyone who had been present during that London season knew that Adrian Winters, the Duke of Winterbourne, had courted her with meticulous attention for 3 full months before making his proposal, and everyone knew that Lady Cecilia Hartley, in what society had deemed either remarkable courage or remarkable foolishness, had declined the most eligible bachelor in England. The Duke was everything proper, Cecilia continued, still watching the garden. Attentive, respectful, thoughtful in ways I only truly appreciated after he was gone. But when he asked for my hand, he spoke only of our family's compatibility, of the advantages our union would bring, of his need for a duchess who could manage his estates with grace and intelligence. He never once mentioned love, father. Not once. And so you refused him. I was young and idealistic, she said, turning back to face him. I wanted to be loved, not merely selected for my suitability. I wanted passion and romance, not a business arrangement dressed in wedding finery. Do you regret your decision? The question pierced through the careful defences Cecilia had constructed around her heart. Did she regret it? In the 2 years since Adrian had accepted her refusal with quiet dignity and withdrawn from society, never again seeking her company, she had asked herself that question countless times. I regret my reasons, she admitted finally. I rejected him because he did not speak the words I wished to hear, without considering whether his actions spoke their own truth. He was unfailingly kind, father. He listened when I spoke of my interests in literature and estate management. He remembered details I mentioned in passing. He never once made me feel less than his equal, despite the disparity in our stations. And Edmund? Cecilia returned to her chair, choosing her words carefully. Edmund is charming when he wishes to be. He says all the right things, makes all the appropriate gestures. But there is something beneath the surface that troubles me, as it troubles you. He asks questions about our properties, about the deeds and documents in your possession. He becomes irritable when I cannot answer precisely, or when you are not immediately available to discuss estate matters. Her father's expression darkened. I have noticed this as well. His interest seems focused more on the administrative details of our holdings than on you, my dear. But the marriage settlement has been drawn and witnessed. We are committed. I understand, Cecilia said, though unease coiled in her stomach. 3 more days, and then it will be done. Across London, in the elegant townhouse that served as the Duke of Winterbourne's primary residence during the season, Adrian Winters stood in his private study, a letter clutched in his hand with enough force to crumple the expensive paper. At 30 years of age, Adrian had long since mastered the art of emotional control. His father, the late Duke, had been a stern taskmaster who believed that displays of feeling were beneath the dignity of their station. From childhood, Adrian had been trained to maintain perfect composure, regardless of circumstance, to present an impassive facade to the world while any turmoil churned beneath. But at this moment, alone in his study with only the dancing flames of the fireplace for company, his carefully maintained control threatened to shatter. Your Grace? His secretary, Mr. Thomas Bancroft, stood in the doorway with the cautious expression of a man who had learned to read his employer's moods. The investigator you hired, Mr. Price, is here with his report. Send him in, Adrian commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos of his thoughts. Nathaniel Price was a former Bow Street runner who had established himself as a discreet investigator for those who could afford his considerable fees. He entered the study with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, bowing respectfully. Your Grace, I have compiled the information you requested regarding Lord Edmund Fairchild. Adrian gestured for him to sit. What have you discovered? Price opened his portfolio, withdrawing several documents. Lord Fairchild presents an interesting picture, Your Grace. Publicly, he maintains the appearance of a respectable gentleman of moderate means. He inherited his title and estate from a distant cousin 5 years ago, but the property was already heavily mortgaged at that time. Debts? Adrian asked. Substantial gambling debts, my lord, carefully concealed through various intermediaries. He owes significant sums to several gaming establishments, and there are rumours that he has been avoiding his creditors through strategic absences from London. Adrian's jaw tightened. Continue. I have also discovered that Fairchild has been involved in several business ventures with other gentlemen, primarily focusing on property transactions. The pattern is curious, Your Grace, In each case, the properties in question were owned by families experiencing financial difficulties. And the outcomes of these ventures? Price's expression grew troubled. That is where the matter becomes murky. The families in question ended up losing their properties entirely within a year of entering into partnership with Lord Fairchild. The legal proceedings were complex, involving contracts and deeds that somehow transferred full ownership to Fairchild or his associates. You suspect fraud. I suspect many things, Your Grace, but suspicion is not proof. Fairchild is clever. Every transaction I have examined appears legal on its surface. If fraud is present, it is buried beneath layers of legitimate-seeming documentation. I would need considerably more time and resources to uncover concrete evidence. Adrian rose from his chair and moved to the window, his mind working rapidly. How long have I employed you on this matter, Mr. Price? 3 months, Your Grace, since you first learned of Lord Fairchild's engagement to Lady Cecilia Hartley. 3 months. 3 months of watching from a distance as the woman he loved prepared to marry a man who might be a sophisticated criminal. 3 months of telling himself that his investigation was motivated by a sense of duty to protect a member of the nobility, rather than by the jealousy and desperation that actually drove him. The wedding is in 3 days, Adrian said quietly. Do you have sufficient evidence to present to the authorities? No, Your Grace. Suspicions and circumstantial connections are not enough to bring charges against a baron. I would need documents, testimony from victims, clear proof of criminal intent. That could take weeks or even months to gather, if it can be gathered at all. Adrian turned back to face the investigator. Then we have a problem, Mr. Price. Because I cannot allow Lady Cecilia to marry this man if he is indeed what we suspect. Forgive my impertinence, Your Grace, but you have no legal standing to prevent the marriage. The lady has accepted Lord Fairchild's proposal, and her father has given his consent. I am aware of that, Adrian replied coldly, which is why I must rely on other methods. After dismissing Price with instructions to continue his investigation with all possible speed, Adrian remained alone in his study, staring into the flames. He had not seen Cecilia since that afternoon 2 years ago, when she had declined his proposal, with words that still echoed in his memory. You speak of duty and compatibility, Your Grace, but you say nothing of affection or regard. I cannot accept a marriage based solely on practical considerations. At the time, her rejection had stunned him. He had courted her carefully, following every rule of proper conduct. He had been attentive, respectful, interested in her thoughts and opinions. He had believed himself clear in his intentions, in his desire for her specifically rather than merely for a suitable duchess. But he had never spoken of love. The word had been trained out of him so thoroughly that even in the moment of proposing marriage to the woman who had captured his heart so completely, he could not force it past his lips. Instead, he had spoken of compatibility, of shared interests, of the practical advantages of their union. And she had refused him. For 2 years, he had told himself that it was for the best, that she deserved better than a man who could not express his emotions properly. He had remained in society, fulfilling his obligations while carefully avoiding any situation where he might encounter her. He had tried, without success, to forget the sound of her laugh, the intelligence that sparkled in her green eyes, the way she had looked at him during their walks in Hyde Park, as though she could see past his carefully constructed defences. Then, 3 months ago, he had learned of her engagement to Edmund Fairchild. The news had struck him with the force of a physical blow, and in that moment of raw pain, Adrian had finally admitted the truth to himself. He loved her. He had loved her from almost the first moment they met, had loved her through every conversation, every dance, every stolen glance across crowded ballrooms. He had loved her when he proposed, though he could not say the words. He had loved her when she refused him, though he had accepted her decision with outward calm. And he loved her still, desperately and completely, even as she prepared to marry another man. But love alone was not enough. He had no right to interfere in her life, no standing to protest her choice. Unless Edmund Fairchild proved to be the criminal Adrian suspected, in which case duty demanded action. The question was whether he was investigating Edmund out of genuine concern for Cecilia's welfare, or whether he was simply using the investigation as an excuse to insert himself back into her life. Adrian did not have an answer he trusted. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called. His closest friend, James Rothwell, Viscount of Ashby, stepped into the study with the easy familiarity of a man who had known Adrian since their school days. "I heard you were destroying yourself with melancholy," James said without preamble. "Thought I might offer distraction." "I am not in the mood for society tonight, James." "Good, because neither am I. I am, however, in the mood for a bottle of excellent brandy and straight talk between old friends." James moved to the sideboard and poured 2 generous measures. "You are planning something foolish regarding Lady Cecilia, are you not?" Adrian accepted the glass, but did not drink. "I hired an investigator to look into Edmund Fairchild's background. And I have discovered enough to raise serious concerns, but not enough to constitute proof of wrongdoing." James regarded him steadily. "Adrian, you cannot save her if she does not wish to be saved." "She does not know she needs saving," Adrian countered. "She sees only that Fairchild is offering to rescue her family from financial ruin. And you, of course, have no personal interest in preventing this marriage." The sarcasm in James's tone was unmistakable. Adrian set down his glass with deliberate care. "My personal feelings are irrelevant. If Fairchild is defrauding families and stealing properties through legal manipulation, then he is a criminal who deserves to be exposed. And if your investigation reveals nothing criminal, what then? Will you stand by and watch her marry him?" Adrian turned away, unable to meet his friend's knowing gaze. "I do not know," he admitted quietly. "I truly do not know." That evening, as twilight descended over London, Cecilia sat at her writing desk, a letter from her younger sister Catherine lying before her. Catherine had married well 2 years ago, wedding the second son of a marquess, and now lived in comfortable prosperity in Hampshire with her husband and infant daughter. The letter was full of gentle concern and loving advice, urging Cecilia to consider carefully whether marrying Edmund was truly the right choice. Catherine had never met the Baron, but something in Cecilia's previous letters had evidently troubled her. "Perhaps you should wait," Catherine had written. "There may be other solutions to father's difficulties that do not require such a sacrifice on your part." But there were no other solutions. The creditors grew more insistent with each passing week. Already, they had been forced to let go most of the staff, retaining only those servants whose loyalty ran deeper than their wages. The house itself was quietly being prepared for sale after the wedding, though Cecilia suspected her father did not yet know that Edmund had already identified a buyer. A soft knock at her door announced Meg's return. The older woman entered carrying a tray with tea and biscuits, settling it on the small table before Cecilia's favourite chair. "You should eat something, my dear," Meg said gently. "You barely touched your dinner." Cecilia joined her companion by the fire, accepting the cup of tea gratefully. "Meg, do you remember the Duke of Winterbourne?" "Of course, my lady. A fine gentleman, if rather reserved in his manner." "I have been thinking about him lately," Cecilia admitted, "wondering whether I made a terrible mistake in refusing his proposal." Meg's expression softened with understanding. The heart often recognizes truths that the mind refuses to acknowledge until it is too late. "But it is too late," Cecilia said. "The bans for my marriage to Edmund have already been read twice. One more reading on Sunday, and then Monday morning I become Lady Fairchild." 3 days is still 3 days, Meg observed quietly. "Many things can change in that time." Cecilia smiled sadly. "You sound as though you expect some dramatic intervention, like something from one of Mrs. Radcliffe's novels. I think we both know that real life rarely provides such convenient rescues." "Perhaps not," Meg agreed. "But I have lived long enough to know that the world is more surprising than we often give it credit for." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes before Cecilia spoke again. "Do you think Edmund loves me, Meg?" "Truly?" The older woman considered her response carefully. "I think Lord Fairchild loves what you represent, my lady. Security, respectability, access to your father's remaining properties. Whether he loves you as a person, as the intelligent and kind young woman you are, I cannot say. His attention seems focused elsewhere." It was the most direct criticism Meg had ever voiced regarding the engagement, and it confirmed what Cecilia herself had sensed, but tried to ignore. Edmund's courtship had been swift and determined, but there was something performative about it, as though he were following a script rather than genuinely wooing her. 3 more days, Cecilia whispered, more to herself than to Meg, and then my choice will be irrevocable. Neither woman could know that, before those 3 days elapsed, everything would change in ways neither could have imagined. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and grey, as though the heavens themselves mourned the union about to take place. Cecilia stood motionless in her bedchamber, while Meg fastened the final pearl buttons along the back of her wedding gown, each one feeling like another lock being closed upon a cage from which there would be no escape. The gown itself was beautiful, fashioned from ivory silk with delicate Brussels lace adorning the high waist and long sleeves. It had belonged to her mother, altered to fit Cecilia's slighter frame, and wearing it felt both comforting and profoundly sad. Her mother had worn this dress when marrying for love. Cecilia wore it now as a sacrifice. "You look beautiful, my lady," Meg said softly, though her voice trembled with emotion she could not quite conceal. A true bride, Cecilia met her own reflection in the looking-glass. Her golden blonde hair had been arranged in an elaborate style with white roses woven throughout, and the veil of Honiton lace cascaded down her back. She did indeed look the part of a bride, but her green eyes held no joy, only resignation. "Thank you, Meg," she managed, her throat tight. "For everything, for all these years of friendship and loyalty. I do not know what I would have done without you." Meg's weathered face crumpled slightly before she mastered her emotions. "You have always been more than a charge to me, my dear, more than a lady to serve. You have been like the daughter I never had." Before either could say more, a gentle knock sounded at the door. The Earl of Hartley entered, and the sight of him nearly undid Cecilia's carefully maintained composure. Her father had dressed in his finest morning coat, the same deep blue he had worn to her sister Catherine's wedding, but the garment hung looser on his frame than it had 2 years ago. The weight of their circumstances had taken its toll in more ways than one. "Cecilia," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "My dearest child." Meg quietly withdrew, leaving father and daughter alone. The Earl crossed the room slowly, as though his feet were reluctant to bring him closer to this moment. When he reached Cecilia, he took both her hands in his and gazed at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "I have rehearsed 1,000 times what I wished to say to you this morning," he began, "but now that the moment is upon us, I find that words fail me." "Father, please," Cecilia whispered. "You must not blame yourself for circumstances beyond your control." "But I do blame myself," he insisted, his grip tightening on her hands. "Every decision I made was meant to secure our family's future, to provide for my daughters as your mother and I always planned. Instead, my failures have brought us to this. I am asking you to sacrifice your happiness, your future, everything you deserve, to rectify my mistakes." Cecilia felt tears threatening, but forced them back. "You have given me everything, Father. A loving home, an education, kindness and understanding when other fathers might have been harsh. If I can repay even a fraction of that debt by securing our family's future, then I do so gladly." The Earl released her hands and turned away, his shoulders shaking with the force of his emotion. "Your mother made me promise when she was dying that I would never force you into a loveless marriage. She wanted both her daughters to marry for affection, as we did, and now I am breaking that sacred vow." "You are not forcing me," Cecilia said, moving to stand beside him at the window. "I make this choice of my own will, Father. Whatever my personal feelings about Lord Fairchild, he offers us salvation from ruin. Our family name will be preserved. Catherine and her children will not suffer from association with disgrace. That must be enough." Her father pulled her into an embrace, holding her as he had when she was a child seeking comfort from childhood fears. "You are so brave, my dearest girl, so much stronger than I ever was. I only pray that Edmund will prove worthy of you, that he will come to value the extraordinary woman he is taking as his wife." They stood together for a long moment, both knowing that everything was about to change irrevocably. When they finally separated, the Earl straightened his shoulders and composed his features into the dignified expression expected of a nobleman. "The carriage is ready," he said quietly. We must not keep the vicar waiting. Meg returned with Cecilia's pelisse and bonnet, her own eyes red-rimmed, though she made no comment on her tears. A young maid, Jenny, appeared to assist with gathering the few items Cecilia would need for the brief journey to the church. The Hartley carriage waited in front of the house, its faded crest barely visible on the door panel. The matched greys that pulled it were the last of their once impressive stable, all the other horses having been sold to satisfy creditors. Even the coachman, old William, looked sorrowful as he waited to hand the ladies inside. "God bless you, Lady Cecilia," he murmured as she passed him. "You are doing a noble thing this day." Cecilia managed a smile for the faithful servant, then allowed Meg to help her into the carriage. Her father would follow in his own conveyance with the few guests they had invited, distant cousins and family friends who still acknowledged them despite their reduced circumstances. Jenny climbed in last, settling onto the forward-facing seat opposite Cecilia and Meg. As the carriage rolled forward, Cecilia gazed out the window at the countryside passing by. It was the route she had travelled countless times, to church on Sundays, to visit neighbours, to attend assemblies in the nearby village. Every tree and hedge was familiar, yet everything felt different now, as though she were seeing it all for the last time. "My lady," Meg said softly, drawing Cecilia's attention, "if at any moment you wish to turn back, you need only say the word. Your father would support your decision, regardless of the consequences." Cecilia shook her head. "There is no turning back, Meg. The bans have been read, the settlement signed. And even if there were, where would we turn? We have exhausted every other possibility." The road began to wind through a small wood, ancient oaks forming a canopy overhead that blocked much of the already dim morning light. It was here, in this isolated stretch between Hartley House and the village, that their journey was interrupted. A figure on horseback suddenly appeared in the middle of the road ahead, causing William to pull sharply on the reins. The carriage lurched to a stop, and Cecilia gripped the edge of her seat to keep from being thrown forward. "What on earth?" Meg exclaimed, peering out the window. The horseman approached slowly, his hands raised in a gesture that might have been meant as peaceful, but only succeeded in appearing desperate. He was a gentleman, that much was clear from his attire, though his dark coat bore dust from hard riding and his cravat sat askew. His face was lined with exhaustion and something deeper, a haunted quality that spoke of profound distress. "Please," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Please, I beg you to hear me. I mean no harm. I swear it on my honour as a gentleman." William had climbed down from his perch, a stout walking stick gripped in his weathered hands. "Stand aside, sir. You are blocking the road, and we have urgent business." "I know you do," the man replied, moving closer but keeping his distance from the carriage. "You are taking Lady Cecilia Hartley to her wedding. That is precisely why I must speak with her." Inside the carriage, Cecilia's heart began to race. "Who is he?" she whispered to Meg. "I do not know, my lady, but he seems educated despite his dishevelled state." The stranger had dismounted now and approached the carriage door with halting steps, as though he fought against his own impulses. "Lady Cecilia," he said urgently, "my name is Vernon Ashcroft. I am a gentleman of Ashcroft Manor in Derbyshire, or at least I was before Edmund Fairchild destroyed my family." Cecilia felt ice forming in her veins. "I do not understand. What are you saying?" Vernon moved closer, and in the cold morning light, Cecilia could see that his dark eyes held genuine anguish. "I am saying that the man you are about to marry is a fraud and a criminal. He has ruined multiple families through schemes involving false property deeds and manipulated contracts. My estate, lands that have belonged to the Ashcrofts for 3 generations, is now in his possession through legal trickery I cannot prove, but know to be true." "That is a serious accusation," Meg interjected sharply. "Why come to Lady Cecilia? Why not take your claims to the magistrate?" "Because I have tried," Vernon said desperately. "I have approached the authorities with my suspicions, but Fairchild is clever. Every document appears legal on its surface. Every transaction seems above reproach. He has covered his tracks with expertise born of long practice. But I know what he did, as do several other gentlemen whose families he has similarly ruined." Cecilia's mind raced. trying to reconcile this wild claim with everything she knew about Edmund. He had been attentive during their courtship, if somewhat cold. He had shown particular interest in her father's properties, but she had assumed that was natural for a man about to merge his holdings with another family's. "Why would he target my family?" she asked, trying to maintain some rational thought through the chaos of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Because your father is vulnerable," Vernon replied bluntly. "Forgive my directness, but everyone in society knows that the Earl of Hartley faces financial difficulties. Fairchild seeks out such situations. He offers salvation in the form of marriage or business partnership, gains legal access to the properties through carefully worded contracts, and then systematically transfers ownership to himself or his associates. This is madness," Cecilia said, though doubt had already begun to creep into her certainty. "If what you say is true, why has no one stopped him?" "Because we cannot prove it," Vernon admitted, frustration evident in every line of his body. "The legal mechanisms he uses are complex and buried in legitimate-seeming documentation. By the time his victims realize what has happened, their properties are already gone, and there is no legal recourse." Meg had grown pale. "My lady, perhaps we should listen to what Mr. Ashcroft has to say." "I am listening," Cecilia replied, though part of her wanted to order William to drive on, to escape this nightmare conversation. "But I do not see what I can do. The marriage contracts are signed. The ceremony is scheduled to begin within the hour." "You can delay," Vernon urged. "Ask for more time. Allow me and the other gentleman he has wronged to gather evidence. If we can prove his crimes, you will be spared a fate far worse than temporary social embarrassment." Before Cecilia could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning air. Vernon's head snapped around, and the colour drained from his already pale face. "No," he whispered. "Not yet. I need more time." 3 riders burst through the trees on the road behind them, their mounts foaming from hard riding. The men wore dark coats and kerchiefs obscuring the lower portions of their faces, but there was nothing of the gentleman about them. These were hired men, rough and dangerous. "Step away from the carriage," the lead rider commanded, his voice carrying a threatening edge that made Cecilia's blood run cold. Vernon wheeled to face them, placing himself between the riders and the carriage. "This does not concern you. Leave now, and no one need be harmed." The leader laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humour. "Lord Fairchild thought you might try something foolish, Ashcroft. Sent us to make sure his wedding proceeds as planned. Now step aside, or we will move you." Inside the carriage, Cecilia watched in growing horror as the situation spiralled beyond her control. Meg gripped her hand tightly while Jenny whimpered in fear on the opposite seat. "William!" Cecilia called through the window. "Drive on! We must reach the village!" But the old coachman stood frozen, his walking stick useless against 3 armed riders. The leader had drawn a pistol and levelled it with casual menace. "Lady Cecilia will continue to her wedding," the man announced. "As for you, Ashcroft, you are coming with us. Lord Fairchild has questions about your recent activities." Vernon made a desperate lunge toward his horse, perhaps hoping to escape and bring help, but the other 2 riders spurred forward with brutal efficiency. One struck him across the shoulders with a riding crop, while the other grabbed his arms and wrenched them behind his back. "Stop this at once!" Cecilia cried, throwing open the carriage door, despite Meg's attempt to restrain her. "Release that man immediately. I shall report this outrage to the magistrate." The leader turned his cold gaze upon her. "With respect, my lady, you will do no such thing. You will proceed to your wedding and speak of this to no one, or Mr. Ashcroft here will suffer consequences most unfortunate." Lord Fairchild's instructions were quite clear on that point. Cecilia stood paralysed, watching as they bound Vernon's hands and pulled him toward one of the horses. His face was bloodied from where he had struck the ground, but his eyes met hers with desperate urgency. "Do not marry him," Vernon managed to say before one of the men struck him again. "For the love of God, Lady Cecilia, do not place yourself in his power." Then they were dragging him away, hauling him onto the horse behind one of the riders. The leader touched his hat in a mocking salute toward the carriage, before all 3 riders disappeared back into the woods, taking Vernon Ashcroft with them. Cecilia stood trembling in the doorway of the carriage, her wedding gown fluttering in the cold breeze, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. Behind her, Meg began to weep quietly, while Jenny had collapsed into panicked sobbing. "My lady!" William called shakily. "What would you have me do?" What indeed? Cecilia thought wildly. Proceed to marry a man who apparently employed violent criminals? Return home and face the complete ruin of her family. They had no proof of Edmund's crimes, only the word of a desperate man who had accosted them on a lonely road. But those men had known Vernon's name. They had been waiting, watching, and they had mentioned Edmund specifically, said he had sent them. Cecilia's hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the doorframe. Everything Vernon had said might be true, and if it was, she was about to marry a man far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "My lady," Meg said urgently, having mastered her tears. "We must decide quickly. The church is but 10 minutes ahead. Your father and the guests will be waiting." Cecilia climbed back into the carriage, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. She had no idea what to do, no clear path forward. But as William urged the horses onward and the carriage began to roll toward the village and the waiting church, one thought crystallized in her mind with perfect, terrifying clarity. She could not marry Edmund Fairchild. Not now. Not after what she had just witnessed. The question was whether she would have any choice in the matter. Unbeknownst to Cecilia, a lone rider had been shadowing the main road for the better part of an hour, keeping to the shelter of the trees. Adrian had risen before dawn, calculating with cold precision when the Hartley carriage would depart and which stretch of the lane offered the greatest risk of an ambush. When the faint echo of raised voices, and moments later the crack of a pistol shot, reached him through the still morning air, he urged his stallion forward without hesitation, every instinct sharpening into icy focus. The sound of hoofbeats pounding through the forest reached Cecilia's ears before she could even process what to do. William had climbed back onto his perch, preparing to drive forward toward the village, when another rider burst through the trees from the opposite direction. This horseman rode with the assured posture of a man accustomed to fine mounts and swift travel. His dark coat was of superior quality, his top hat secure despite the speed of his approach, and something in the way he carried himself spoke of authority and breeding. As he drew closer, Cecilia's breath caught in her throat. It was Adrian Winters, the Duke of Winterbourne. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. Adrian's dark blue eyes met hers through the carriage window, and the intensity of his gaze sent a jolt through her entire being. Then his attention shifted to the woods where Vernon's captors had disappeared, and his expression hardened into something fierce and determined. "Which way?" he demanded, pulling his mount alongside the carriage. "Your Grace," Cecilia managed, her voice shaking. "They took him into the woods, but you must not. Those men are dangerous. They have weapons." Adrian's jaw tightened. "How many?" "3," Meg called from inside the carriage, having overcome her initial shock. "They beat that poor gentleman and dragged him away. Said they were acting on Lord Fairchild's orders." Something dangerous flashed in Adrian's eyes. Without another word, he spurred his horse toward the woods, disappearing into the shadows between the ancient oaks. "Your Grace, wait!" Cecilia cried, but he was already gone. Inside the carriage, Cecilia sat frozen, her mind reeling from the rapid succession of shocks. First, Vernon Ashcroft's desperate warning, then his violent abduction, and now Adrian appearing as though summoned by her thoughts. What was he doing on this road? Why was he here at all? "My lady," Meg said urgently, gripping Cecilia's hand. "We must decide what to do. Shall I have William drive to the village? Your father and the guests are waiting at the church." Cecilia stared at her companion, the absurdity of the suggestion nearly provoking hysterical laughter. How could she possibly proceed to her wedding after what had just occurred? But what was the alternative? Return home and face her father's ruin. Everything they had worked toward, everything she had agreed to sacrifice, would be lost. "I do not know," she whispered. "Meg, I do not know what to do." The sound of men shouting erupted from the woods, followed by the clash of steel. Cecilia's heart leapt into her throat. Adrian had found Vernon's captors, and from the sounds of struggle, he was engaged in combat. Jenny, the young maid, had pressed herself into the corner of the carriage, whimpering softly. William climbed down from his perch once more, his weathered face troubled as he approached the window. "Begging your pardon, Lady Cecilia, but those are fighting sounds. The Duke might need help. Should I go for the constable?" "The nearest constable is in the village," Meg replied. "By the time you fetch him, this will be long finished one way or another." More sounds of struggle echoed through the morning air, then a sharp cry of pain. Cecilia could not tell if it came from friend or foe. Every instinct urged her to flee, to escape this nightmare, but she found herself unable to move. Then, abruptly, silence fell. Cecilia held her breath, straining to hear any indication of what had transpired. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the sound of hoofbeats approached once more, slower this time, and 3 figures emerged from the woods. Adrian rode at the front, his coat torn at the shoulder and dirt smudging his face, but otherwise apparently unharmed. Behind him, 2 of Vernon's captors followed on foot, their hands bound and their expressions sullen. Adrian had evidently disarmed them and taken them prisoner. "The third man escaped," Adrian said without preamble as he drew alongside the carriage. "He took Mr. Ashcroft with him, heading north at speed. These 2 will answer for their assault, but first we must see to Lady Cecilia's safety." He dismounted in a fluid motion and approached the carriage, his eyes searching Cecilia's face with an intensity that made her heart race. "Are you harmed? Did they threaten you in any way?" "No," Cecilia managed, though her voice trembled. "They wanted only to take Mr. Ashcroft and ensure that I proceeded to my wedding." "Your Grace, what are you doing here?" Adrian's expression became guarded. "That is a conversation best held in private. But first, we must move you to safety. Those men may return with reinforcements." "I must go to the church," Cecilia protested, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "My father, the guests, they are all waiting. The ceremony cannot proceed under these circumstances," Adrian finished firmly. "Lady Cecilia, you have just witnessed an act of violence committed by men claiming to act on your fiancé's orders. Vernon Ashcroft has been taken prisoner. Do you truly intend to place yourself in Edmund Fairchild's power after seeing what he is capable of?" Cecilia felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. "What choice do I have? My family's entire future depends on this marriage. The settlement is signed. The debts will be called in if Edmund withdraws his offer. And if Edmund is a criminal who intends to defraud your father and steal your properties," Adrian countered, "what then? Will you sacrifice yourself to a man who may be planning far worse than mere financial manipulation?" Meg interjected softly. "My lady, perhaps we should at least delay. Give ourselves time to understand what has truly happened here." Cecilia looked between her companion and the Duke, seeing the genuine concern in both their faces. Then she glanced at the 2 bound men, who watched the exchange with wary eyes. Everything Vernon had said, every warning he had tried to give, now seemed terrifyingly plausible. "Very well," she said finally, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "We will delay, but I must send word to my father immediately. He will be frantic with worry." Adrian nodded. "I have a property not far from here, Riverside Manor. It is small but comfortable, and more importantly, it is secure. You can rest there while we determine our next course of action. William," he addressed the coachman, "can you find your way to the Earl of Hartley's residence?" "Aye, Your Grace. I have driven Lady Cecilia there many times." "Then take one of these prisoners with you as proof of what has occurred. Inform the Earl that his daughter is safe in my protection and that I will explain everything when he arrives at Riverside Manor. Tell him to come alone or with only his most trusted servants. This matter must remain quiet until we understand the full extent of Fairchild's schemes." William nodded and moved to secure one of the bound men. The prisoner protested but fell silent when Adrian fixed him with a cold stare. "What about the wedding?" Cecilia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Edmund will be waiting at the church when I do not arrive, when my father appears without me." "Let him wait," Adrian said grimly. and let him wonder what has happened. In the meantime, we will have time to question these men and discover exactly what your intended husband has been planning." Cecilia took a shuddering breath, feeling as though the world had tilted on its axis. This morning she had woken as a bride preparing for her wedding, resigned to a loveless marriage for the sake of her family. Now she sat in her carriage in a torn wedding gown, fleeing to the protection of the man she had rejected 2 years ago, while her fiancé's hired criminals were taken into custody. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "I must ask again. Why were you on this road? How did you happen to be here at precisely the moment I needed assistance?" Adrian's expression became unreadable. "As I said, that is a conversation best held in private. For now, trust that I am here and that I will do everything in my power to protect you and uncover the truth about Edmund Fairchild." He moved to mount his horse once more, then paused and looked back at her. For just a moment, the careful control he maintained slipped, and Cecilia saw raw emotion in his dark blue eyes. Something that might have been fear or relief, or perhaps something deeper that she dared not name. "I am glad you are safe, Lady Cecilia," he said softly. "More glad than I can properly express." Then he was back on his horse, taking command of the situation with the natural authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He instructed William on the route to Riverside Manor, secured the second prisoner to the back of the carriage, and prepared to escort them to safety. As the carriage rolled forward once more, this time turning away from the village and the waiting church, Cecilia sat back against the cushions and closed her eyes. Meg remained blessedly silent, giving her time to process everything that had occurred. The image of Adrian appearing through the trees played repeatedly in her mind, the fierce determination in his face as he rode toward danger to help a stranger. The way he had looked at her with such intensity, such concern. The careful control in his voice, even as his eyes betrayed deeper feelings. 2 years ago, she had rejected his proposal because he had not spoken of love. But today, without a single romantic declaration, he had ridden to her rescue, fought for her safety, and offered her protection from a danger she had not even recognized. Perhaps, Cecilia thought as the carriage carried her toward an uncertain future, she had been asking the wrong questions all along. Perhaps love was not measured in pretty words and grand gestures, but in the willingness to act when action was needed most. Riverside Manor appeared through the morning mist, a graceful stone house set amid carefully tended gardens. It was smaller than Hartley House, but possessed an elegance that spoke of tasteful wealth and careful maintenance. As the carriage drew to a halt before the entrance, servants emerged with the efficiency of a well-trained household. Adrian dismounted and gave rapid orders. The prisoner was taken into custody by 2 footmen, who appeared entirely unsurprised to be securing a bound criminal. A housekeeper materialized to greet the unexpected guests, her professional composure never wavering despite the unusual circumstances. "Mrs. Phillips," Adrian addressed her. "Lady Cecilia Hartley and her companion require immediate assistance. They have had a most distressing morning. Please prepare the blue guest chambers and provide whatever they need." "At once, Your Grace," the housekeeper replied, her sharp eyes taking in Cecilia's torn wedding gown and pale face with obvious concern. "My lady, if you will follow me, I shall see to your comfort immediately." Cecilia allowed herself to be helped from the carriage, her legs unsteady after the morning's shocks. Meg stayed close beside her, providing silent support as they followed Mrs. Phillips into the house. The entrance hall was warm and welcoming, with spring flowers arranged in vases and paintings of pastoral scenes adorning the walls. It felt safe, peaceful, utterly removed from the violence of the woods and the complications waiting in the village. "Your Grace," Cecilia turned back to Adrian, who stood watching her with that same intense expression. "Thank you for everything. I do not know what would have happened if you had not appeared when you did. We will speak soon," he promised. "Once you have had time to recover from the morning's events. For now, rest. You are safe here, Lady Cecilia. I give you my word." As Mrs. Phillips led her up the elegant staircase, Cecilia glanced back once more. Adrian remained in the entrance hall, speaking quietly with one of his servants, but his attention kept drifting toward the stairs. as though he needed to assure himself that she was truly there, truly safe. In the blue guest chamber, Meg helped Cecilia out of the ruined wedding gown, while Mrs. Phillips directed maids bringing fresh water and towels. A simple day dress of soft green muslin was provided, borrowed from some previous guest, and adjusted hastily to fit Cecilia's slighter frame. Once the servants had departed, leaving them alone, Cecilia sank into a chair by the window and finally allowed her carefully maintained composure to crack. Tears came then, hot and fierce, for everything that had happened and everything that might have been. Meg knelt beside her, taking her hands in a comforting grip. "You are safe now, my dear. The Duke will protect you. That much is clear. But what happens next?" Cecilia whispered. "Edmund will be furious when I do not appear. My father's debts remain unpaid. Vernon Ashcroft is still missing, possibly injured or worse, and I have placed myself entirely in the power of a man I rejected 2 years ago. A man who has just proven himself worthy of trust," Meg countered gently. "Lady Cecilia, the Duke did not hesitate. He rode directly into danger to help you. Whatever his reasons for being on that road, whatever his motivations, his actions today speak clearly." Cecilia wiped her tears, struggling to regain control. "I do not understand any of this. Why was Adrian there? How did he know?" "Perhaps," Meg suggested softly, "he never truly left." The words hung in the air between them, pregnant with implications that Cecilia was not yet ready to examine. Instead, she moved to the window and gazed out at the gardens below, trying to make sense of a world that had transformed completely in the space of a single morning. The Earl of Hartley arrived at Riverside Manor as the afternoon sun broke through the morning's clouds, his carriage bearing the marks of hasty travel. Adrian watched from the drawing-room window as the older man descended, his face haggard with worry and exhaustion. William, the coachman, had clearly delivered the Duke's message, but seeing his daughter safe would be the only true comfort. Cecilia met her father in the entrance hall, still wearing the borrowed green muslin dress. The moment their eyes met, the Earl's composure crumbled. He crossed the space between them in swift strides and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Thank God," he whispered against her hair. "Thank God you are safe. When William arrived with that man and told me what had happened on the road, I feared the worst." "I am unharmed, father," Cecilia assured him, though her voice trembled. The Duke arrived in time to prevent any real danger. The Earl released her and turned to Adrian, who had entered the hall quietly. For a long moment, the two men regarded each other, years of unspoken history hanging between them. Then the Earl extended his hand. "Your Grace, I find myself in your debt once again. William explained that you rescued my daughter from what might have been a terrible situation." Adrian accepted the handshake, his expression carefully neutral. "I did what any gentleman would do when witnessing an assault, my lord. Lady Cecilia's welfare is paramount. Nevertheless, you have my profound gratitude." The Earl's gaze sharpened. "William also said you have taken one of the attackers into custody. I should like to speak with this man immediately." "Of course," Adrian replied. "But first, perhaps we should discuss what your daughter witnessed on the road this morning. I believe the situation is more complex than a simple assault by brigands." They assembled in the study, a comfortable room lined with books and warmed by a cheerful fire. Cecilia sat beside Meg on a small sofa, while the Earl took an armchair opposite Adrian's desk. The Duke stood by the fireplace, his posture suggesting a man preparing to deliver difficult news. "Lady Cecilia," Adrian began, "perhaps you should recount what Mr. Ashcroft told you before he was taken." Cecilia recounted Vernon's warnings about Edmund, the claims of fraud and property manipulation, the desperation in his voice. Her father's expression grew increasingly troubled as she spoke. "Vernon Ashcroft," the Earl murmured when she finished. "I knew his father years ago, a respectable gentleman with extensive holdings in Derbyshire. If his son has been ruined, as he claims, then Edmund Fairchild may indeed be the criminal Ashcroft suggested," Adrian concluded. He moved to his desk and withdrew a leather portfolio. "For the past 3 months, I have employed an investigator to look into your daughter's intended husband. I hope you will forgive the presumption, but certain aspects of Fairchild's behaviour troubled me." The Earl's eyebrows rose. 3 months? That would be shortly after the engagement was announced. Yes, Adrian admitted, meeting the older man's gaze directly. I was concerned for Lady Cecilia's welfare. Something passed between the two men, an acknowledgement of deeper feelings that neither voiced aloud. The Earl nodded slowly. What did your investigation uncover? Adrian spread several documents across his desk. Fairchild has substantial gambling debts, carefully concealed through intermediaries. He has also been involved in multiple business ventures with other gentlemen, primarily focusing on property transactions. In each case, the families in question were experiencing financial difficulties. The Earl rose and approached the desk, studying the papers. His face paled as he read. These names: Lord Pemberton, Sir James Lockwood, the Ashcroft family, all respected families who fell into sudden ruin. And in each case, Adrian continued, Fairchild or his associates ended up with control of the properties. The legal proceedings appear legitimate on the surface, but the pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. Cecilia watched her father's hands shake as he held one particular document. Father, what is it? These are contracts similar to the ones Edmund gave me to sign, the Earl said hoarsely. He claimed they were standard settlement documents, but the language... He looked up at Adrian. Your Grace, if I had signed these without thorough legal review, the Hartley properties would have transferred completely to Fairchild's control, Adrian finished grimly. Not merely as security for the marriage settlement, but as outright ownership. You would have lost everything. The Earl sank back into his chair, his face ashen. I nearly signed them. He was pressuring me, claiming the creditors required immediate documentation. If the wedding had proceeded as planned, he would have gained legal control of everything you own, Cecilia said quietly. That was his intention from the beginning, was it not? The courtship, the proposal, even the generous settlement offer. All of it was calculated to place him in position to steal our properties. Adrian nodded. That is my belief, yes, though I must emphasize that I have no concrete proof of criminal intent. Everything Fairchild has done remains technically legal, if ethically reprehensible. That is why Vernon Ashcroft was so desperate this morning. He knows what Fairchild has done but cannot prove it in a court of law. The men who attacked Ashcroft, the Earl said suddenly, they claim to be acting on Edmund's orders. Surely that constitutes evidence of wrongdoing. The prisoner we have in custody denies any connection to Fairchild, Adrian replied. He claims they were merely highway robbers who happened upon your daughter's carriage. Without Ashcroft's testimony, we have only Lady Cecilia's word that he mentioned Fairchild by name, and her word alone may not be sufficient to bring charges against a baron. Cecilia felt frustration rising. So Edmund will face no consequences. He will simply continue to prey upon vulnerable families. Not if we can gather sufficient evidence to build a proper case, Adrian said. But that will require time and careful investigation. In the immediate term, we must address your situation, Lady Cecilia. You did not appear for your wedding this morning. By now, Fairchild will be aware that something has gone wrong. The Earl straightened in his chair. The wedding is cancelled, obviously. I will send word to Edmund immediately that the engagement is dissolved. That may not be wise, Cecilia said suddenly. Both men turned to look at her in surprise. If we simply cancel, Edmund will know we suspect him. He will flee before any investigation can be completed, and we will lose any chance of bringing him to justice. What are you suggesting? Her father asked warily. Cecilia rose and moved to stand before the fire, gathering her thoughts. Mr. Ashcroft and the other families Edmund has ruined deserve justice. If we act rashly now, he will escape and continue his schemes elsewhere. But if we proceed carefully... Cecilia, no, the Earl said firmly. I know that tone. You are about to propose something dangerous. I propose that we maintain the appearance that nothing has changed, Cecilia said, turning to face them. I will return to London with a story of being frightened by bandits on the road, of the carriage being delayed. I will apologize to Edmund for the disruption to our wedding and agree to a new date. Absolutely not, Adrian and the Earl said simultaneously. Cecilia pressed forward. Think about it. If I remain close to Edmund, if he believes I am still his intended bride, he will not suspect that we are investigating him. He will continue with his plans, perhaps even become careless. We will have time to gather evidence. You are asking to place yourself directly in the power of a man we believe to be a criminal, Adrian said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. A man who employs violent thugs and has no compunction about destroying innocent families. I cannot allow it. With respect, Your Grace, it is not your decision to allow or forbid, Cecilia replied, though her tone remained respectful. It is mine. The Earl had paled further. Cecilia, what you suggest is madness. The danger is precisely why we need more time, Cecilia insisted. Father, think of the families Edmund has already destroyed. Think of Mr. Ashcroft, who risked everything to warn us. If we do nothing, if we simply retreat to safety while Edmund escapes justice, we are complicit in whatever harm he causes next. Meg spoke for the first time. My lady, might I suggest a compromise? If you are determined to proceed with this plan, perhaps certain safeguards could be put in place. What sort of safeguards? The Earl asked, grasping at any alternative to his daughter's proposal. I would insist on several conditions, Adrian said, his expression grave. First, Lady Cecilia would never be alone with Fairchild. Mrs. Dawson would remain with her at all times. Second, all meetings with Fairchild would occur in public spaces or in the Hartley residence with servants present. Third, under no circumstances would any documents be signed without my legal advisers reviewing them thoroughly. Fourth, the Earl added, the investigation would proceed with all possible speed. My daughter would not remain in this dangerous position one moment longer than absolutely necessary. Cecilia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Then you agree to my plan? I agree, most reluctantly, her father replied, and only because I recognize that determined look in your eyes. You are your mother's daughter, God help us all. She had that same stubborn courage. I do not like this, Adrian said flatly. Everything in me rebels against placing you in danger, Lady Cecilia. But I acknowledge the logic of your argument. If we are to build a case against Fairchild that will stand in court, we need time and evidence. Your cooperation could provide both. Then it is settled, Cecilia said, though her hands trembled slightly. I will return to London tomorrow with a plausible story. Father, you must appear relieved that the wedding was merely delayed, not cancelled. Act as though we are proceeding with plans for a new ceremony. The Earl nodded wearily. I will play my part, but Cecilia, if at any moment you feel genuine danger, you must withdraw immediately. Promise me. I promise, Cecilia said, moving to embrace him. I will be careful, Father. After further discussion of details, the Earl departed to make arrangements in London. Cecilia remained at Riverside Manor for the evening, as returning immediately would raise questions about where she had spent the intervening hours. As twilight descended, she found Adrian standing alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens. She approached quietly, and for a moment they stood in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. You never answered my question, Cecilia said softly. Why were you on that road this morning? Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he might not respond. Finally, he spoke. I have been following Fairchild's movements for weeks. When I learned he had scheduled the wedding for today, I could not stay away. I told myself I was merely observing, ensuring nothing untoward occurred. But the truth, he turned to face her. The truth is that I could not bear the thought of you marrying him. Even before I knew what he was, I could not accept that you would be lost to me forever. Cecilia's breath caught. Adrian, thou! 2 years ago, you rejected my proposal because I did not speak of love, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. You were right to do so. I was a coward who hid behind duty and propriety because I had never learned how to express what I felt. But I am learning now, Cecilia. And what I feel, what I have always felt, is that you are the only woman I have ever loved or will ever love. Tears sprang to Cecilia's eyes. Why did you never say so before? Because I thought love was weakness. Because I was raised to believe that emotions should be mastered and concealed. Because I am a fool. He reached out tentatively and took her hand. But I am a fool who would ride through fire to keep you safe. Who would face any danger to protect you. Who would give everything to win your heart. You already have it, Cecilia whispered. I think you always have. Cecilia returned to London the following afternoon, her story carefully rehearsed. She had been frightened by bandits on the road who demanded valuables. Her carriage had been delayed while William ensured their safety, and she had spent the night at a respectable inn with Meg as chaperone. It was plausible enough to satisfy society's curiosity while explaining her absence from the wedding. The Earl had sent word ahead to Edmund, expressing profound apologies for the disruption and assuring him that his daughter remained eager to proceed with their marriage. A new date would be set once Cecilia had recovered from her ordeal. Edmund's response arrived within hours, delivered by his own footman. The letter was everything correct and solicitous, expressing relief at Cecilia's safety and understanding about the delay, yet something in the precise formation of his words, the careful construction of each sentence, sent a chill through her. He writes as though composing a legal document rather than a letter to his intended bride, Meg observed, reading over Cecilia's shoulder in the drawing room of Hartley House. That is because everything Edmund does is calculated, Cecilia replied quietly. Every word, every gesture, every kindness. Nothing is genuine. I cannot believe I failed to see it before. You saw what he wished you to see, my lady. He is expert at deception. The Earl entered the room, his expression weary. Edmund has sent word that he will call this afternoon. He insists on seeing you to assure himself of your well-being. Cecilia straightened her shoulders. Then I shall receive him. Meg will remain with us throughout the visit, as will you, father. We must not give him any opportunity to be alone with me. Syme. When Edmund arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, Cecilia was waiting in the drawing room, wearing a pale lavender day dress that made her appear appropriately delicate after her supposed ordeal. Meg sat in the corner with needlework, while the Earl stood by the fireplace. Edmund entered with his usual smooth grace, his expression arranged in lines of tender concern. He was handsome, Cecilia acknowledged objectively, with his regular features and elegant bearing. But knowing what lay beneath that attractive surface transformed everything. Where once she had seen charm, she now recognized manipulation. Where she had perceived consideration, she now understood control. My dear Cecilia, he said, taking her hand and bowing over it. I have been beside myself with worry, when you did not arrive at the church, and then to hear of the attack on the road. He paused, his eyes searching her face. You are truly unharmed. Merely shaken, my lord, Cecilia replied, allowing just the right amount of tremor in her voice. The bandits were frightening, but they took only a few small items before fleeing. William was very brave in protecting us. Edmund retained her hand slightly longer than propriety demanded. I shall ensure William is properly rewarded for his courage, and I have already engaged additional outriders to accompany your carriage in future. You must not be subjected to such danger again. You are most thoughtful, Cecilia murmured, gently withdrawing her hand. Edmund turned to the Earl. My lord, I wonder if we might discuss the rescheduling of the ceremony. I am eager to make Cecilia my wife without further delay. Of course, the Earl replied, his tone carefully neutral, though perhaps we should allow my daughter a few days to recover from her ordeal before finalizing arrangements. Naturally, Edmund agreed, though Cecilia detected a flash of impatience in his eyes. Shall we say a week hence? That should provide adequate time for recovery, while not prolonging the delay unnecessarily. A week. Cecilia fought to keep her expression composed. Adrian had said he needed time to investigate, to gather evidence. A week might not be sufficient. Perhaps 10 days would be more appropriate, she suggested carefully, to allow for proper rest and to ensure all arrangements can be made properly. Edmund's smile tightened fractionally. My dear, I am anxious to make you my bride and to begin our life together. Surely 10 days is excessive for recovery from a minor fright. My daughter's health is not a matter to be rushed, the Earl interjected firmly. 10 days seems reasonable given the circumstances. For a moment, Edmund's mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Then it was back in place, the concerned fiancé once more. Of course, forgive my impatience. 10 days it shall be. Now, my lord, there remains the matter of those documents we discussed. Have you had opportunity to review them with your solicitor? Not yet, the Earl replied. My attention has been entirely focused on my daughter's well-being, but I shall arrange a meeting shortly. Time is rather pressing, Edmund said, an edge entering his voice. Your creditors have been quite insistent, and I had assured them that matters would be resolved immediately following the wedding. Now, with this delay, the creditors will wait, the Earl said coldly. They have little choice in the matter. Cecilia watched this exchange with growing unease. Edmund was pressing too hard, revealing his desperation in ways he normally concealed. The situation was making him reckless. The visit continued for another quarter hour, with Edmund making conversation about wedding arrangements and their future together. He spoke of the properties they would manage jointly, of improvements he planned to make, of how efficiently they would consolidate their holdings. Everything focused on the practical, the material, the financial. Not once did he speak of affection or happiness or any sentiment befitting a man discussing his imminent marriage. When he finally departed, Cecilia sagged against the sofa cushions, exhausted from maintaining her performance. He is getting desperate, the Earl observed. That makes him more dangerous. But also more likely to make mistakes, Meg added thoughtfully. Your Grace was right to suggest this plan, my lady. Edmund's behaviour today revealed much. Over the following days, Cecilia endured several social visits with Edmund, always with Meg present, and always in public spaces. At a musical hosted by Lady Pemberton, Edmund remained at her side throughout the evening, his hand possessive on her arm as he introduced her to various acquaintances as his soon-to-be bride. Lady Cecilia will be a great asset to my endeavours, he told a banker, whom Cecilia recognised as one of her father's creditors. The consolidation of our properties will create opportunities for substantial development. The banker nodded approvingly. Consolidation is indeed wise in these uncertain times, Lord Fairchild. I look forward to discussing potential investments once your marriage is formalised. Cecilia smiled blandly while her mind raced. Edmund was already planning how to exploit the Hartley properties, already cultivating relationships with financial institutions. The marriage was merely a legal mechanism to give him access. During a tea at Edmund's townhouse, Cecilia employed the ruse they had planned. Meg engaged Edmund in conversation about wedding flowers, while Cecilia excused herself briefly to wash her hands. Instead, she slipped into the study she had glimpsed during previous visits. The room was elegant, but coldly masculine, with dark wood furniture and minimal decoration. Cecilia moved quickly to the desk, trying several drawers. Most were locked, but one yielded to her touch. Inside, she found stacks of correspondence, all arranged with meticulous precision. She had perhaps 2 minutes before her absence would be noted. Her hands trembled as she rifled through the papers, looking for anything incriminating. Most were routine business matters, but one letter caught her eye. It was from a man named Sutherland, discussing the matter we spoke of regarding the Ashcroft properties, and mentioning the usual arrangements for managing objections. The phrasing was vague, carefully worded to avoid explicit admission of wrongdoing, but the implications were clear. Cecilia committed the name Sutherland to memory and carefully returned the letter to its place. Cecilia! Edmund's voice called from the hallway. She slipped out of the study and into the adjacent washroom, emerging moments later with composed features. Forgive me. I became slightly disoriented. Your home is quite grand. Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly, as though trying to determine if her explanation was genuine. Perhaps you should remain in the drawing room, my dear. I would not want you to become lost. That evening, Cecilia reported her findings to Adrian at Riverside Manor, where she and Meg had travelled under pretence of visiting a dressmaker. The Earl accompanied them, unwilling to let his daughter out of his sight for long. Sutherland, Adrian repeated, making a note. I know that name. He is a solicitor with a reputation for creative interpretations of property law. If he is involved in Fairchild's schemes, that provides another avenue for investigation. My investigator has made progress as well, he continued, spreading documents across his desk. I have contacted 3 gentlemen who lost properties in dealings with Fairchild. All 3 tell similar stories of business arrangements that seemed legitimate, but resulted in complete loss of their estates. They are willing to provide testimony, though they fear retaliation. The Earl leaned forward. Can their testimony build a legal case? Possibly, though without concrete documentation proving fraud, a skilled barrister might argue these were merely unfortunate business losses. We need the evidence that connects Fairchild directly to knowing deception. Meg spoke up from her position near the fire. Your Grace, I have learned something that may prove useful. The housekeeper at Lord Fairchild's residence mentioned to her sister, who happens to be my cousin's companion, that his lordship receives a mysterious visitor late at night, a rough-looking man with a scar, who brings packages and leaves quickly. Adrian's eyes sharpened. When does this visitor typically call? Thursday evenings, apparently, always after the household has retired. That is 2 days hence, the Earl observed. If we could observe this meeting, it would give us evidence of Fairchild's connections to criminal elements, Adrian finished. But observation alone may not be sufficient. We need to know what is in those packages, what business they conduct. Cecilia felt a plan forming. If someone were inside the house during one of these meetings, hidden where they could overhear. Absolutely not, Adrian and the Earl said simultaneously. Father, Your Grace, please listen, Cecilia insisted. I have access to Edmund's home as his intended bride. If I were to visit that evening and find an excuse to remain late, perhaps claiming to have left something behind, it is far too dangerous, Adrian said firmly. If Fairchild discovered you spying on him, there is no telling what he might do. He would not harm me before the wedding, Cecilia argued. He needs the marriage to be legal to gain access to our properties. After the ceremony, perhaps, but not before. The Earl had gone pale. Cecilia, I cannot allow this. The risk is necessary if we are to stop him, she finished. Father, think of Vernon Ashcroft, still missing. Think of the other families Edmund has destroyed. We have an opportunity to gather real evidence. We must take it. The room fell silent as the three men considered her words. Finally, Adrian spoke, his voice heavy with reluctance. If we proceed with this plan, and I emphasize if, then extensive precautions would be required. I would need to be nearby, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. I as well, the Earl added. I will not allow my daughter to face such danger without her father present to protect her. Then it is settled, Cecilia said, though her heart raced at what she had just committed herself to. Thursday evening, I shall visit Edmund and find a way to observe his meeting with this mysterious visitor. Thursday evening arrived shrouded in fog, the gas lamps casting wavering halos of light through the mist that clung to London's streets. Cecilia sat in the drawing room of Hartley House, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Meg made final adjustments to her hair. The plan they had devised was dangerous, but necessary if they were to gather the evidence needed to stop Edmund permanently. Remember, the Earl said for the third time, his face drawn with worry. At the first sign of genuine danger, you leave. Evidence is not worth your life, Cecilia. I understand, Father, Cecilia replied, though her voice betrayed the nervousness she felt. Meg will be with me at all times, and you and His Grace will be nearby. Adrian had arrived an hour earlier, dressed in dark clothing that would allow him to move unseen through the night. His expression was grim as he reviewed the plan once more. My man has confirmed that Fairchild's mysterious visitor typically arrives through the servants' entrance at approximately 10 o'clock. The housekeeper retires by 9:30, and most of the staff are dismissed to their quarters by then, leaving Edmund essentially alone to conduct his business, the Earl concluded. Precisely, Adrian said. Lady Cecilia, you and Mrs. Dawson will arrive at 8 for what appears to be a routine evening visit. You will need to find an excuse to remain past the usual hour. Cecilia nodded. I shall claim to be selecting fabrics for the wedding breakfast tablecloths. Edmund has a collection of samples in his study that I expressed interest in previously. It should seem natural enough, and I will accompany you throughout, Meg added firmly. Not for one moment will you be alone with that man. At precisely 8 o'clock, the Hartley carriage delivered Cecilia and Meg to Edmund's townhouse. A footman admitted them, and Edmund appeared moments later, his expression arranged in pleasant surprise. Cecilia, my dear, what an unexpected pleasure, he said, though his eyes held a calculating gleam. I had not expected to see you this evening. Forgive the intrusion, Cecilia replied, allowing him to take her hand briefly. but I found myself unable to sleep, thinking of all the arrangements still to be made. I remembered you mentioned having fabric samples that might suit for the breakfast. Might I trouble you to view them? Edmund's smile tightened fractionally. Of course, though I have business to attend to later this evening. Perhaps tomorrow would be more convenient. Oh, but I am so anxious to finalize these details, Cecilia pressed, injecting just the right note of feminine persistence into her tone. It shall only take a moment, I promise. Edmund clearly wished to refuse, but could not do so without appearing churlish. Very well, the samples are in my study. This way. The study was exactly as Cecilia remembered it from her previous illicit visit, dark wood and leather creating an atmosphere of cold masculinity. Edmund retrieved a leather portfolio from a cabinet and spread several fabric swatches across his desk. These are the finest available, he said, his impatience barely concealed. Select whichever pleases you, and I shall arrange for the order to be placed tomorrow. Cecilia made a show of examining each sample carefully, asking questions about thread counts and dye quality, anything to prolong the interaction. Meg stood near the door, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Time crawled forward. Edmund grew increasingly restless, checking his pocket watch repeatedly. At 9:15, he finally spoke with undisguised irritation. My dear, I really must insist we conclude this another time. As I mentioned, I have pressing business tonight. Of course, Cecilia said contritely. I shall just make my final selection. Perhaps the ivory damask, though the cream silk is also lovely. Meg, what do you think? As Meg crossed to examine the fabrics, buying a few more precious minutes, Cecilia noticed Edmund's gaze drift to the locked cabinet where she had seen him place documents during her previous visit. Something in his expression suggested anxiety, a concern that whatever he kept there remained secure. Finally, unable to delay further without arousing suspicion, Cecilia made her selection. The ivory damask will be perfect. Thank you for your patience, Edmund. Think nothing of it, he replied, though his relief at their impending departure was obvious. Now, if you will excuse me, I really must prepare for my appointment. As Edmund escorted them toward the door, Cecilia executed the second phase of their plan. She deliberately caught her heel on the carpet edge and stumbled, sending the fabric portfolio flying. Swatches scattered across the study floor. Oh, how clumsy of me, she exclaimed, immediately dropping to gather the samples. Please, Edmund, do not trouble yourself. Meg and I will collect these. Edmund, forced by courtesy to assist, knelt to retrieve swatches from near his desk. In that moment, Cecilia palmed the small vial Meg had given her earlier and tipped its contents into the glass of brandy sitting on Edmund's side table. The colourless liquid dissolved instantly, leaving no trace. It was not poison, merely a strong sleeping draught that Adrian's physician had provided, enough to render Edmund unconscious for several hours, but causing no lasting harm. Their original plan of hiding in the house to observe Edmund's meeting had been deemed too dangerous. Instead, they would ensure Edmund slept through the encounter entirely, allowing Adrian's men to intercept the mysterious visitor themselves. Within minutes, they had gathered the scattered fabrics. Edmund practically rushed them to the entrance, clearly desperate to be rid of them before his appointment. Thank you again, Cecilia said as they departed. I shall see you tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow, Edmund replied distractedly, already closing the door. In the carriage, Cecilia allowed herself to tremble. It is done. He will drink the brandy within minutes, as is his custom after visitors depart. You were magnificent, my lady, Meg said softly. Now we wait. They drove only to the end of the street, where Adrian and the Earl waited in an unmarked carriage. Cecilia quickly recounted what had occurred. Adrian checked his pocket watch. It is 9:30. The draft should take effect within 10 minutes. My men are positioned around the house. When the visitor arrives, they will apprehend him and search whatever he brings. The fog thickened as they waited, muffling sound and reducing visibility. At precisely 10 o'clock, a figure emerged from the mist, moving toward Edmund's servant's entrance. He was a rough-looking man with a scarred face, carrying a leather satchel. Adrian's men moved with silent efficiency. Within moments, They had the man secured, his protests dying as one of Adrian's operatives showed him a magistrate's warrant. The satchel was confiscated and brought to Adrian's carriage. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Property deeds, contracts, correspondence, all the evidence of Edmund's fraudulent schemes laid bare. Names Cecilia recognized from Adrian's earlier investigations, along with many more she did not. Families ruined, properties stolen, lives destroyed, all carefully documented in Edmund's own meticulous hand. "This is enough," Adrian said quietly, his expression fierce with satisfaction. "More than enough to bring charges that will stand in any court." They moved quickly then. Adrian's men entered Edmund's house through the servants' entrance, finding him unconscious in his study as planned. The magistrate, whom Adrian had alerted earlier, arrived with constables. Edmund was formally arrested while still insensate, placed under guard until he regained consciousness. The Earl stood in Edmund's study, staring at the locked cabinet that Adrian's men had opened, revealing even more incriminating documents. "He kept records of everything," he said, his voice hollow with horror. "Every family he destroyed, every property he stole. It is all here." "His arrogance made him keep trophies," Adrian replied grimly. "And that arrogance has ensured his conviction." Cecilia felt no triumph, only exhaustion and profound relief. "What of Mr. Ashcroft? Is there any word?" "My men located him this afternoon," Adrian said, his expression softening. "He was found at a small coaching inn several miles north of here, bruised but very much alive. One of Fairchild's hirelings lost his nerve when he realized the authorities were closing in and abandoned his prisoner rather than risk being questioned." He paused, his gaze steady on Cecilia. "Mr. Ashcroft made his way to my agent and begged an audience. He has given a full account of his abduction and of Fairchild's dealings, names, dates, sums, even the wording of certain conversations. My clerks have set it all down. He is resting now under guard, and when Edmund is brought to trial, he will provide sworn testimony." The following morning, news of Edmund Fairchild's arrest spread through London like wildfire. The charges were devastating. Fraud, theft, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and a litany of other crimes spanning years. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies of victims numerous and consistent. Cecilia sat with her father and Meg in the drawing room of Hartley House, feeling as though she had awakened from a nightmare. "It is truly over." "It is over," the Earl confirmed, embracing his daughter tightly. "You were extraordinary, Cecilia. Your courage saved not only our family but countless others." Later, Adrian arrived, and Cecilia met him privately in the garden. The fog had lifted, revealing pale autumn sunlight. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. For believing something was wrong when I could not see it. For protecting me. For giving me the chance to fight back." Adrian took her hands gently. "You needed no protection, Cecilia. You were the bravest of us all." The morning after Edmund's arrest dawned clear and cold, a sharp contrast to the fog-shrouded evening that had preceded it. Cecilia woke in her chambers at Hartley House feeling as though an enormous weight had lifted from her shoulders, though exhaustion still clung to her bones. Meg entered carrying a tray with tea and toast. "The household is in quite a state, my lady. News of Lord Fairchild's arrest has spread through London faster than wildfire. We have already received 3 morning callers, though your father has sent them away with the message that you are indisposed, which is entirely truthful," Cecilia replied, accepting the cup of tea gratefully. "I feel as though I could sleep for a week." "You deserve rest, my dear. What you accomplished last night required extraordinary courage." Before Cecilia could respond, a soft knock sounded at the door. The Earl entered, his expression more peaceful than she had seen in months. "Cecilia, how are you feeling this morning?" "Tired, father, but well. Has there been any further news?" The Earl settled into the chair beside her bed. "Adrian sent word an hour ago. Edmund regained consciousness shortly before dawn and immediately demanded his solicitor. When confronted with the evidence, he attempted to claim the documents were forgeries planted by enemies seeking to destroy him. But surely the magistrate did not believe such obvious lies. The magistrate has dealt with criminals for 30 years. He knows desperation when he sees it. The Earl took his daughter's hand. Edmund will be formally charged this afternoon. The evidence is overwhelming, Cecilia. Not only the documents from his study and the ones his associate was carrying, but testimony from Vernon Ashcroft and 3 other gentlemen whose families were ruined by similar schemes. Cecilia felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from relief or exhaustion, she could not say. Mr. Ashcroft is truly recovered. Adrian visited him this morning at the physician's house where he is recovering. He has injuries from his captivity, but nothing that will not heal with time. He was most eager to express his gratitude to you for believing his warning. I nearly did not, Cecilia admitted quietly. I almost proceeded to that church, Father, almost married Edmund without question. If not for Mr. Ashcroft's courage in trying to warn me, if not for Adrian being there. But you did not marry him, the Earl interrupted gently. You listened, you questioned, and when the truth became clear, you acted with remarkable bravery. I am proud of you, my daughter, more proud than I can properly express. They sat together in comfortable silence for several moments before the Earl spoke again. There is another matter we must discuss. Your engagement to Edmund is naturally dissolved given the circumstances. But the financial difficulties that led to that arrangement remain. The creditors will not wait indefinitely. Cecilia had been dreading this conversation. I know, Father. Without the settlement Edmund offered, we face the same ruin that prompted my acceptance in the first place. That may not be entirely true, the Earl said carefully. Adrian has made a proposal that I wish to discuss with you. Cecilia's heart quickened. What sort of proposal? He has offered to loan us the funds necessary to satisfy our most pressing creditors, with extremely generous terms for repayment, no interest, and a timeline that would allow us to recover our financial footing without undue pressure. That is extraordinarily generous, Cecilia said slowly. But Father, we cannot accept such charity, particularly not from him. Is it charity when offered by a man who loves you? Cecilia looked up sharply. Father, what are you saying? The Earl smiled, a knowing expression softening his features. My dear child, I am not blind. I have seen how Adrian looks at you, how he has worked tirelessly to protect you from Edmund's schemes. 2 years ago, when you rejected his proposal, I believed you made a terrible mistake. Now I understand that you were not yet ready to recognize what he offered. And you believe I am ready now? I believe you have grown into a woman who understands that love is demonstrated through actions as much as words. That courage, loyalty, and unwavering support matter more than romantic speeches. The Earl squeezed her hand. Adrian has proven himself worthy of you, Cecilia. The question is whether you feel the same regard for him. Cecilia thought of the past weeks, of Adrian appearing on the road when she needed rescue most, of his patient investigation into Edmund's crimes, of the way he had looked at her on the terrace at Riverside Manor, confessing feelings he had held for years, of his willingness to risk everything to keep her safe. I do, she admitted softly. I think I have for some time, though I was too stubborn to acknowledge it. Then perhaps you should tell him so, the Earl suggested with a gentle smile. Adrian arrived at Hartley House that afternoon, ostensibly to discuss the legal proceedings against Edmund. The Earl greeted him in the entrance hall, then discreetly withdrew, leaving Adrian and Cecilia alone in the drawing room, with Meg stationed just outside the door as propriety demanded. Lady Cecilia, Adrian said formally, though his eyes betrayed deeper emotion. I hope I am not disturbing your rest. I know you must be exhausted after last night's events. Not at all, Your Grace. Please sit. Cecilia gestured to the chair opposite hers. When they were both seated, she continued, My father tells me you have made an extraordinarily generous offer regarding our financial difficulties. Adrian's expression became guarded. It is nothing more than one friend assisting another in a time of need. I hope you will not feel obligated by the offer. I do feel obligated, Cecilia said honestly, but perhaps not in the way you fear. Adrian, these past weeks have shown me things about myself that I had not fully understood. 2 years ago, I rejected your proposal because I wanted declarations of love and romantic gestures. I failed to recognize that you were showing me your heart in every action, every consideration, every moment of your attention. Adrian leaned forward, hope kindling in his eyes. Cecilia, please let me finish, she continued, her voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. You have protected me, fought for me, believed in my strength even when I doubted it myself. You have proven yourself in ways I was too young and foolish to value before. And I find that I have come to love you, not for your title or your wealth or your generosity, though those are all admirable, but for your character, your integrity, your unwavering loyalty to those you care for. Adrian rose and crossed to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Cecilia, these 2 years without you have been the longest of my life. Every day I regretted my inability to express what I felt, my failure to tell you plainly that you had captured my heart so completely that no other woman could ever compare. I love you. I have always loved you. And if you will give me another chance, I swear I will spend every day proving worthy of the gift you offer. You already have proven it, Cecilia whispered, tears streaming down her face. You already have. Adrian reached up to gently wipe away her tears. Then will you consent to be my wife? To let me spend the rest of my life loving you as you deserve? Yes, Cecilia said, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, Adrian. 1,000 times, yes. He rose, drawing her up with him, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of years of longing finally fulfilled. When they finally separated, both were breathless and smiling. We should inform your father, Adrian said, though he seemed reluctant to release her from his embrace. He already knows, Cecilia replied with a laugh. I suspect he and Meg are celebrating in the hallway even now. 6 months had passed since Edmund Fairchild's trial and conviction. The courtroom proceedings had been the scandal of the season, with testimonies from Vernon Ashcroft and 4 other ruined gentlemen laying bare the extent of Edmund's fraudulent schemes. The evidence Adrian had helped gather proved overwhelming, and Edmund was sentenced to transportation to the penal colonies for a term of 14 years. Spring had returned to London, bringing with it the promise of renewal. Cecilia stood in the drawing room of Adrian's townhouse, now her home as well, watching the morning light stream through the tall windows. In a few hours, she would host her first formal gathering as the Duchess of Winterbourne, a small but significant affair to which she had invited those who had played crucial roles in bringing Edmund to justice. Your Grace, you look troubled, Meg observed, entering with a vase of fresh flowers. The older woman had remained as Cecilia's companion, though her role had evolved into something more akin to a trusted friend and advisor. Not troubled, Meg, merely reflective. Cecilia turned from the window with a smile. So much has changed since that morning when my life seemed destined for a different path entirely. Changed for the better, I would say. Meg arranged the flowers on a side table. His Grace is a good man, my lady, and you have brought light into his life that was sorely lacking. Cecilia felt warmth spread through her at the mention of Adrian. Their marriage 3 months earlier had been everything she could have wished. An intimate ceremony at the small church near Riverside Manor, attended only by family and close friends. No grand society spectacle, merely 2 people committing themselves to each other with honesty and love. The weeks since had been a revelation. Adrian, no longer constrained by the emotional reserve that had characterized their first acquaintance, proved to be thoughtful, passionate, and deeply caring. He consulted her on matters of estate management, valued her opinions, and made clear in countless small ways that she was his partner in all things, not merely a decorative addition to his household. The Earl arrived first that afternoon, accompanied by Catherine, Cecilia's younger sister, who had travelled from Hampshire with her husband and young daughter specifically for the occasion. The reunion between father and daughters was joyful, Catherine exclaiming over how well Cecilia looked, how happiness had transformed her. "You are radiant," Catherine said, embracing her sister warmly. "Married life clearly suits you." "It does," Cecilia admitted, unable to suppress her smile. "Though I confess, I never imagined I would be so content. Adrian is everything I could want in a husband." Vernon Ashcroft was the next to arrive, walking with only a slight limp, the last remnant of his ordeal. He had recovered well in the months since his rescue, and his natural estates, which Edmund had stolen through fraudulent means, were in the process of being legally restored to him. Lady Winterbourne, he greeted Cecilia with a deep bow. Or should I say, Your Grace, I confess I am still adjusting to your elevated title. Cecilia will suffice among friends, she replied warmly. Mr. Ashcroft, I am so pleased to see you looking well. How fare the restoration efforts at Ashcroft Manor? Slowly but surely, Vernon replied, thanks in large part to His Grace's assistance in navigating the legal complexities. I owe you both an enormous debt. You owe us nothing, Adrian said, appearing at Cecilia's side and placing a proprietary hand at the small of her back. Your courage in trying to warn Lady Cecilia, despite the obvious danger to yourself, likely saved her from a terrible fate. If anything, we remain in your debt. Other guests arrived in succession. Lord Pemberton, whose family had been among Edmund's first victims, and who had provided crucial testimony at the trial. Sir James Lockwood, who had lost his ancestral home to Edmund's schemes and was now working with legal counsel to recover what had been stolen. Adrian's friend James Rothwell, Viscount Ashby, who had supported the investigation from the beginning. When all were assembled in the drawing room, Adrian called for attention. My friends, my wife and I wish to gather you here today for a specific purpose. Each of you played a vital role in bringing Edmund Fairchild to justice and preventing further harm to innocent families. Your courage, your testimony, your willingness to come forward despite personal cost. These actions made the difference between success and failure. Cecilia stepped forward. We also wanted to share some news. Through the legal proceedings, a substantial portion of the assets Edmund had fraudulently obtained have been recovered. While it is impossible to fully restore what was lost, the courts have authorized the distribution of these recovered funds to Edmund's victims. Murmurs of surprise and gratitude rippled through the gathering. Vernon's eyes widened. Your Grace, this is extraordinary news. Many of us had accepted that recovery was impossible. Adrian's legal team worked tirelessly to trace the funds and properties, Cecilia explained. While the process has been complex and time-consuming, the results have exceeded our hopes. Each of you will receive documentation detailing what has been recovered on your behalf. The Earl, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I wish to add that the Hartley family's financial difficulties have also been resolved, thanks to the recovery of funds Edmund had already extracted from us through his preliminary arrangements. We are no longer burdened by the debts that nearly destroyed us. The remainder of the afternoon passed in conversation both sombre and celebratory. These families, united by their shared ordeal, found comfort in each other's company and in the knowledge that justice had been served. As the gathering drew to a close and guests began to depart, Vernon approached Cecilia privately. Your Grace, I must tell you something. When I intercepted your carriage that morning, I was desperate and frightened. I had no real plan beyond warning you of the danger you faced. If you had dismissed me as a madman, if you had proceeded to that church, I do not know what I would have done, but I did not dismiss you, Cecilia replied gently. And your warning, combined with the Duke's investigation, saved not only my family but many others as well. You were brave, Mr. Ashcroft, never doubt that. I was terrified, Vernon admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. But I could not stand by and watch another family destroyed. My father always taught me that a gentleman's duty extends beyond his own interests. I am glad I honoured his memory, even imperfectly. After Vernon departed, Cecilia found herself alone with Adrian in the now quiet drawing room. He drew her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You were magnificent today, he murmured against her hair, gracious and compassionate with our guests, ensuring each felt valued and heard. I learned from the best, Cecilia replied, tilting her head to look up at him. You have shown me what it means to use one's position and resources for good, Adrian. To protect those who cannot protect themselves. We did that together, Adrian corrected. Your courage in gathering evidence, in placing yourself at risk, was extraordinary. I was merely the support structure for your bravery. Cecilia laughed softly. I think we may debate that point for years to come, but I am content to share the credit, as long as I share everything else with you as well. Always, Adrian promised, his voice deepening with emotion. For as long as I draw breath, you will have my love, my loyalty, and my unwavering support. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life, Cecilia. You have taught me that showing one's heart is not weakness but strength. That vulnerability between two people who trust each other completely creates a bond stronger than any armor. And you have taught me to recognize love not merely in words, but in actions, Cecilia replied. To value constancy and integrity over romantic gestures that mean nothing without substance behind them. They stood together in the fading afternoon light. Two people who had found their way to each other through danger and deception, emerging stronger and more certain of what truly mattered. That night, as Cecilia prepared for bed, Meg helped her out of her gown and into a nightdress. "You are happy, my lady?" Meg asked softly. "Truly happy?" "More than I ever imagined possible," Cecilia confirmed. "I thought once that happiness meant being swept away by passion and romance. Now I understand that true happiness is built day by day, through shared challenges overcome together, through mutual respect and genuine partnership. Adrian and I are building something real, Meg. Something that will endure." "Then my heart is at peace," Meg said with satisfaction. "I have watched over you since you were a girl, my lady. Seeing you content and cherished brings me more joy than I can express." Later, as Cecilia lay in her husband's arms, she reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been preparing to sacrifice herself in a loveless marriage to save her family. Now she lay beside a man who valued her mind as much as her heart, who had fought for her when she was vulnerable, and who continued every day to prove himself worthy of her love. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked, his voice drowsy. "That I am grateful," Cecilia replied, "for Vernon's warning, for your investigation, for every circumstance that prevented me from making the greatest mistake of my life. And most of all, grateful for a second chance to recognize what I was too foolish to see the first time you asked." Adrian tightened his embrace. "Then we are both fortunate beyond measure. Sleep now, my love. Tomorrow begins another day of our life together." As Cecilia drifted towards sleep, secure in Adrian's arms and in the life they were building together, she understood finally what she had been searching for all along. Not dramatic gestures or passionate declarations, but this quiet certainty, this deep trust, this knowledge that she had found someone who would stand beside her through whatever challenges life might bring. That was worth more than any fairy tale romance could ever be.